Have you ever wondered what it would have been like if Rover would have had either the finances or the idea to make more variants of the Rover 45? It started off looking like this with a nice boot on the front of it and a face to copy the Rover 75, but obviously we all know it was just a facelift Rover 400 anyway, and that was basically a Honda. It was quite good to start with, but then rather than developing it into a better car, they just did this, just changed the headlamps and made a bit more of a generic looking grille. All down the side it's exactly the same, and then you come around the back and they're always fitted with a broken bumper, and they got rid of the handle and they got rid of the somewhere to actually open the boot with, squared the back end off slightly, and it all actually looks quite good really. And then when you get inside the car, they decided not to do anything about the problem with these things peeling and coming off, but to get rid of the wood cappings, because that was obviously too expensive, and then to replace the seats with ones that are far less comfortable, and then change the dashboard for something much more plasticky. Same goes for the roof lining, which of course was obviously a problem for a very long time, but yeah, well, it'll do. And within this dash, of course, they put these facelift really flimsy dials in. On this car they're all fine, but that is pretty unusual. But overall the shape of the car still looked quite nice, if rather dated. But what if they actually had this car with a couple of other shapes to it, like BMW have gone completely overboard with now, but maybe just to the level that they used to have, like the R8 car that this Rover actually replaced. Go back to the 90s, this was an incredibly successful car, and there's a good reason for that. It looked modern, it handled well, and it had really good engines in it as well that were quite a way ahead of the competition. Not that the competition will admit it, or the competition's fans will admit it. They started off with a 5-door hatch like that, and then they made a saloon variant of it, which was very nice, and usually a booted version of a hatchback doesn't look too good, but this one did. And then they did a 3-door version of the 5-door version, and then they did a coupe version, and then they did a cabriolet version, and then finally they did an estate version as well. That's 6 different body shapes on one shell. Whereas this car was a hatchback and a saloon. So let's try and visualize these cars with other variants by using a bit of imagination. First of all, a 3-door variant. So the car would remain exactly the same. On the front, the same A-pillar just there. It would swoop over the back in pretty much the same fashion, but the front doors would be slightly longer, leaving a big window at the back. That one's quite easy to imagine. How about a coupe version? Probably start off with it being ever so slightly lower, but the same length. And then of course the A-pillar would have a slightly different angle to it, and so would the C-pillar as well. Then we'd have one big door on the side like this, preferably frameless as well. Estate version. Front end of the car would look exactly the same, but of course it's the back end we're interested in. This kind of long extended roof there with an angle similar to the 75 estate, possibly with roof bars. And then rather than this back door like that, much more of a square end there, which makes for better getting inside technology. We wouldn't want the same as the Honda Civic estate, because that really did look like just one of these but with a bit bolted on the back. They couldn't be bothered to do anything with the doors, and it just looked lazy. Better though would have been an estate version of the booted. Yes, definitely. Being a little bit longer means it's more suitable to an estate. So we have big doors there with nice sharp angles, making it easy to get big heads on the inside. And then the extended roof line would go all the way along at quite a sharp angle, meaning a more purposeful estate car. We'd like that. What about a cabriolet version, of course? Well, no, I don't fancy that at all. But what might have been cool would have been a streetwise version of the 45. Yeah, let's imagine that one. So, a slightly jacked up version of this same car with non-colour coded bumpers and arch liners and things like that. And then the side skirts also non-colour coded, and the rear bumper as well with the same. Possibly some roof bars on the top, just like the streetwise. And then of course what you will need would be big chunky rubbing strips down the side, not colour coded, not trying to be anything other than streetwise. Everyone would have made fun of it, wouldn't they? But it doesn't matter. They made fun of everything else they did. So what difference does it make, really? The other thing they didn't really take advantage of was different engines. I mean, the diesel, the 2-litre diesel, they never even put the BMW engine in it. And I don't think they should have done, but they could have gone for that Fiat engine that they put in the Saab and the Vauxhall Vectra, because that was a good engine. And that was a lot more powerful, a lot lighter feeling. As a fan of the K-Series engine, I don't know why they didn't do a VVC version of it, or a 1.8 turbo version of it, because that would have been great. Instead, they just had the 1.8 and the 1.4, the 1.6, which are practically the same, and the V6, 2-litre V6, which was the only positive thing I can think of to say about the V6, especially the 2-litre V6, was it sounded nice. Other than that, it just drunk loads and loads of fuel and didn't really make any progress. The R8 car, of course, had a very different thing. It had a diesel engine, which was no better or no worse than the one they swapped it for. It had a K-Series, or it had a Honda D-Series with either a single or a twin cam head. They also had the M-Series and the T-Series, which were very heavy engines, but reliable and good, and they did a turbo version of that. Out of all of these variants, I think the one I would like would have been the Estate, or the Coupe, or the 3-door, or maybe the streetwise version of it. What do you think? BMW went completely mad with this, because it started off with like just 3 cars in a 3, a 5 and a 7 series, and they did a long wheelbase version of the 7 series, and then suddenly they started making a Estate car. I think of it this way, just the 5 series alone, 5 series, then 5 series Estate, and then they jacked that up and made an X5. So they took an X6, which was a coupe version of a off-road version of an Estate car, and lowered it down a little bit to make the GT5 or whatever it's called. And then they did the same with the rest of them as well, like the X5. Then they made a bigger version of that called the X7, and an X3 and an X1 as well, and it's all just too many cars. And then they've got this 2 Series 7-seater as well, which looks just like a Vauxhall Zafira. And if you hadn't seen the BMW badge on it from the side, you'd think it was a Vauxhall Zafira. BMW are an example of a car company that are trying too hard to make everything that you could ever possibly want, and then it just becomes a confusing mess. Speaking of which, earlier on I was behind a new Fiesta, and that was in front of a new Corsa, and they were both pretty much the same colour, and they looked almost the same car. It's just that one had a Ford badge and one had a Vauxhall badge. The 1990s Rover 45. She had the same platform as the Honda Civic of the time, but it had different backlights, different wheels, different headlamps, and from a distance you could see which was which, even though they were the same car.